যদি সবাই ফিরে যায়, ওরে ওরে ও ভাগা সবাই ফিরে যায়, যদি গহন পথে যাওয়ার কালে কেউ ফিরে না চায়, তবে পথের কাটা তুই রক্ত মাখা চরণ তলে একলা দলরে, তুই রক্ত মাখা চরণ তলে একলা দলরে, যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে, তবে একলা চলো রে। যদি আলো না ধরে, ওরে ওরে ও ভাগা আলো না ধরে, যদি ঝড় বাদলে আধার রাতে দুয়ার দেয় ঘরে, তবে বজ্রা নলে আপন বুকের পাঁজর জ্বালিয়ে নিয়ে একলা চলো রে, আপন বুকের পাঁজর জ্বালিয়ে নিয়ে একলা চলো রে, যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে, তবে একলা চলো রে। একলা চলো, একলা চলো, একলা চলো, একলা চলো রে।
Hi guys, thank you for joining the live stream. I'm back with a live stream after many a day because I was busy with short films background score work that has suddenly come up. So we have with us for the very first time Dr. Pingali Gopal, who is a neonatal and pediatric surgeon, but who also writes books on decoloniality and decolonizing Bharat and other books as well. You can find the links to his books in our description box. So first of all, thank you sir very much for joining our podcast.
There's a break in the voice.
Yeah, might be some internet issue. I can hear you perfectly.
Yeah. Hello.
Are you from a Wi-Fi or a data?
I'm from Wi-Fi. Should I convert it into data, like from my mobile thing?
If it makes some difference, I can hear you perfectly.
You can hear me?
Yeah,
There's
perfectly.
a lot of cutting. Yeah, I'll just.
Yeah. Hello Nandish, hello Rishi, hello Milton Patel. Hello.
Yeah, I'm just
Yeah.
changing it to my
Okay.
mobile data. I
Yeah.
think that's there's a lot of disturbance in the voice, so
I see. Oh, there are viewers of ours who already have read your work or like your work.
yeah. Okay.
So, sir, thank you for joining our podcast, first and foremost. And how did you get to reading about decoloniality and or let's say reading S.N. Balagangadhara? How did a surgeon get interested in that?
Yeah, I'm still not very clear with the voice actually. Is there
Oh.
a problem on your side or my side? I'm not sure. Can you hear me?
Probably, yeah, probably your side because I can hear you perfectly.
You can. Okay, fine, great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Guys, let us know. Can you all hear mine and sir's voice perfectly, or is one of us breaking up? Okay, sir. Sir, shall we continue?
Yeah. Okay. Fine. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. So yes, sir. So how did a surgeon get interested in kind of social science stuff, and how did you stumble upon S.N. Balagangadhara's work?
Yeah. So basically, yeah, I was cruising along in my practice, and then basically I was trying to understand, what was happening to my country, the people around, and the kind of narratives I was fed with during my school and college was something which was not very consistent with my lived experience as an Indian. And because of my father's government job, I moved across to various parts of the country. And secondly, I was in the medical profession where I was dealing with people from all kinds of
Yeah.
strata and
Yeah.
all kinds of people. And I realized that there was some essential unity to the country, which the narratives really don't seem to be quite aware of. And I was a little confused because people used to say unity in diversity, but we were always worried about what this unity really consisted of.
Yeah.
And it was, I think, only by reading Balu, I realized that there was this essential unity across our culture,
Right.
which brings together the East and the West and the North and the South into one single cultural civilization, which is
Yeah.
India or Bharat. Yeah, or Bharat.
Yeah.
So basically, my interest is that of a lay person, a
Yeah.
citizen who's very concerned with the country, with the kind of divisive narratives which are going around in the name of
Yeah.
religion, in the name of caste, and all of it essentially boils down to what the colonial understanding of India was. And this was perpetuated post independence by our scholars without even questioning that many of these narratives, many of these understandings about Indian culture could be wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, so, sir, what year was this when you first read or heard of Balagangadhara?
Yeah, that was basically my life took a turn towards Indian culture when I read, I think, Swami Vivekananda at the age of 40.
I see.
So
I
that
see.
was quite a tragedy because for 40 years of my life, I did not know anything about Swami Vivekananda beyond his Chicago address, where he
Yeah.
says, "The brothers and sisters of America." And
Yeah.
when I read the 9 volumes of Swami Vivekananda, I was absolutely astounded by the amount of richness which India has by terms of its cultural heritage, its history, its philosophy, the achievements which we made in the material and the spiritual fields. And yet I was so unaware of all these things, and it was, I blame the kind of education system, which did not allow me to learn all these great things about India. And that was a great turning point. And then I started exploring the various other works of Indian greats, like people who kind of really understood Indian culture, like Sri Aurobindo, Ananda Kumaraswamy, Tagore. And then I came across Balu, and the first book which I came across was Western Foundations of the Caste System. I think that's a very paradigm changing book. Unfortunately, the social sciences of today, they have a lot of difficulty in accepting Balu's program because they have to change a lot of their thinking, and a lot of their paradigms need to
Yeah.
be changed if Balu's thesis is kind of accepted. So that's a problem with the social sciences today. But as
Right.
a concerned Indian citizen, I think today the solutions for a proper harmonious India lies in properly reading and understanding Balu.
Sir, I'm wondering, like, with your schedule at the age of 40, how did you suddenly decide that I'll definitely read Vivekananda? Or were you reading other stuff anyway in your free time? Or did you just suddenly take up the habit of reading?
No, I was a very voracious reader now because
Oh, I see.
I used to read a lot of books in school and college, and but I was a product of a typical kind of urban convent English medium educated Indian this thing, and I fed up. I grew up on a staple diet of a lot of English fiction and non-fiction,
I
and
see.
we used to read voraciously. And but thing is, Indian culture and Indian thinkers were way beyond our spectrum, and that was a tragic part because, like, we were reading Agatha Christie or Woodhouse or Alistair MacLean or Desmond Bagley and if somebody who's more serious would go for stuff like Ayn Rand or, like, I mean, all those things we were reading, but everything was Western oriented. So whatever view we had about India or whatever view we had about the world was framed by that English kind of an education and the English kind of literature. So to come back to the Indian, I mean, I have discovered Aurobindo about 5 years back, And I'm kicking myself, for so many years I have not even bothered to read this such a great man who practically said everything about India. Everything, whatever we wanted to know, he has already said. And
Right.
but thing is, these are people who are excluded from our curricula for reasons we don't know. But
Right.
that's what I mean. The importance of that's why Balu kind of gives a perspective of India from an Indian lens. So he doesn't hate. He doesn't call us to say that you hate the West for what they have done, but he says like you have been viewing India through a Western lens. So it is a very warped kind of view you have about India. So you wear an indigenous lens, an Indian lens, and try to see what your culture is all about, what your culture is talking about, religions, what is dharma, what is varna, what is jati, how is caste a very foreign notion, how is it being superimposed on our own structures and causing a lot of distortion. So these are kind of
Right.
things which Balu kind of asks us to do,
Yeah.
and I think that kind of appealed to me as a very concerned Indian citizen.
Right. Now, sir, let make us go through your book and the research that you came upon, or let's say even presented in your book itself. I want people to read your book and buy your book as well. This is sir's book, Decolonizing Bharat,
Yeah, that's a
the
book.
Balu way. I guess this is a interpretation or boiling down further the ideas of S.N. Balagangadhara, right?
Sorry, I didn't get that.
And is it a reinterpretation or boiling down and making a gist of S.N.
No,
Balagangadhara's
I mean it's
ideas?
not interpretation. Basically, it's a summary and
Okay,
of the main works of Balu. I mean, they have done
right.
the Ghent School in Belgium and the
Yeah,
Ghent scholars of Balu. Uh, it's an extensive work over 4 decades, and
yeah.
I couldn't really. I'm not a scholar. I cannot really go into all the aspects of what Balu says, but I think
Yeah,
I have read those aspects which are very relevant to me as a concerned Indian citizen.
right.
And those books and essays, I have kind of summarized them for a more kind of at one place. I
Right.
wanted to bring because I've been writing these articles and the summaries for a long time, and then the idea came to kind of bring them together so that people kind of get an overview about what the Balu School is talking about. And
Right.
in this, Indica and Hari Vatlamani of Indica, they kind of supported this project. So we came out with
Okay.
this book, which kind
Right.
of brings up all the major kind of philosophies of what they think about Indian culture into one single book. So that's kind of for it has its place perhaps to as a stepping stone for people to kind of get deeper into Balu's works. Yeah.
Right. Sir, have you read any other decoloniality or decolonization or post-colonial scholars like the people who started decoloniality, all people like J. Sai Deepak and stuff?
Yeah, Sai Deepak I have read, but basically
Okay.
my attitude is not that of a scholar. It is
Hmm.
like a student or at the very bottom level, it's a very concerned citizen who wants to see some harmony in my country, who wants to understand my country, and I'm kind of I've gone to Balu school to kind of understand some concepts about India.
Right.
So like
Right.
my topic is not decoloniality, or I mean I just want to see because a lot of things what they say makes a lot of sense to me as an Indian, and I think those things need to permeate into general consciousness of the
Right.
people, their ideas about religion and caste and other things. Yeah.
Sir, can you give us some examples and the exact arguments that S.N. Balagangadhara gives on the things that you think everyone else was getting wrong in Indian education system, but S.N. Balagangadhara got them correct? What are those
Yeah,
kind of things?
it's not that Balu kind of his research program is like starts with the question, that what if all the colonial narratives are wrong, and they gave us a lot of things about Indian religions, about Indian caste system, uh, the Aryan theory, and all that. What if they're wrong? And like, do we have an alternative explanation for what they are trying to say? And then they say, yes, there is an alternative. And so basically, when he says the most important thing about religion. So I have divided this book into four main components, which is religion, caste, secularism, and Indian culture. Four different things. So religion, I think the main book which Balu makes his thesis is The Heathen in His Blindness.
Yeah.
And because people couldn't really understand that book, he wrote a simplified form, which is
Yeah.
To All Roads Lead to Jerusalem. Now, his thesis is like basically the phenomena which you see in India, like Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, these are by definition they are not religions. So
Okay.
definitionally, if you say that Christianity, Islam, and Judaism are religions, then the Indian phenomena are not religions because it's a
Mm-hmm.
different category altogether.
Yeah.
And if you say in the reverse that if you say that the Indian phenomena like Hinduism, Buddhism, or Jainism, or Sikhism are religions, then
Yeah.
Christianity, Islam, and Judaism do not become religions.
Yeah. That's what Sitaram Goel said. Sitaram Goel used to say that Hinduism is a religion. They are political
It's
projects.
it's not a political thing, it's a different
Hmm.
category altogether. So when you're
Right.
comparing these two kind of phenomena, it's not like comparing apples with oranges, but
Hmm.
you are comparing basically a brinjal with a fruit, a vegetable. It's
Yeah.
a completely different category.
Hmm.
So why did this happen? So what
Hmm.
Balu says is, what are these Indian phenomena? These Indian phenomena are basically, they behave completely different to how religions behave,
Yeah.
right? So what are they? So he says, for want of a better word, we call them traditions. So these are all
Okay.
traditions with a
Hmm.
lot of practices, which can be a Brahmin doing Sandhya Mandanam. You can have somebody. There's some caste system. There's some rituals going on. There's some pujas going on. There are a lot of practices. So when colonials they came to India, they saw a lot of alien practices, and they experienced this kind of phenomena, and for them the explanation for all this phenomena became a unified kind of a word, which was Hinduism. And how did
Hmm.
this term come into being is because of their own background of being a religious. They
Yeah.
came from a religious culture where religion
Yeah.
was the most important point of their culture, where
Yeah.
everything, their entire history of Europe is that of religion, starting from
Hmm.
the church, starting from the Protestant Reformation, the
Yeah.
Renaissance, the Enlightenment. Everything was based upon religion. So that was the
Yes.
background with which they came to India. So it was
Hmm.
not out of any mischief, but they saw this lot of practices, they saw this lot of books, but they saw a lot of a phenomena which did not have one single book, which did not have a single temple, a single god, multiple gods. All of them are equal. There are gurus, there are lineages, there are
Hmm.
people who are following different traditions. Some people believe in moksha, some people don't. Some people have a guru who's a living guru, sometimes is a dead guru. So these are all things
Yeah.
which didn't make sense to them. So they wanted to make sense of them, of a country which they were trying to rule. So they created this Hinduism, and then
Hmm.
after that they realized that there was something called Buddha. So the texts were clearer, so they
Yeah.
formed a Buddhism. And then they
Hmm.
came from this background where the Protestants were fighting the Catholics, so they kind
Yeah.
of superimposed those kind of fights on Indian culture, and they said that Buddhists were fighting Hindus, Buddha was fighting Hindu, or Hindu Brahmanism, and all these kinds of theories came along about Indian religions. Everything was described about religions did not fit with their idea of Abrahamic religion, and yet we
Hmm.
call them religions. So that is the
Yeah.
main thesis of Balu. Yeah.
Yeah. I have more questions on S. N. Balagangadhara's understanding of this, but here's an interesting question for you from our audience. He's saying, ask sir, even the early pagan philosophies resemble Hindu dharma in terms of encouragement of questioning. They are regarded as religions, so why not Hindu dharma? Aren't all religions a way of life?
Way of life is a very kind of a very vague term, because what is this way of
Hmm.
life you're talking about? Because uh, it's a whole kind of thing. It's a ritual based society, a culture
Yeah.
where rituals. I mean, again, Balu has this important thesis where learning configuration of a culture. So the learning configuration of a culture of the West is actually religion, and the why question takes importance there. And when there is a why question, there is a natural evolution into atheism. There's a natural evolution of science which flourishes in such a background. The learning configuration of Indian culture was rituals, and the how question or the performative ability comes into precedence here. So basically, it's a whole conglomerate of rituals, mythologies, philosophies, everything comes together. And these are all traditions, and traditions are very flexible. They're dynamic at the same time, very flexible. But you know who belongs to a tradition. And it is also important to understand that some element might be missing from a tradition, but still you belong to the tradition. So many things happen in a tradition which you kind of don't expect in a religion. Like there's no concept of blasphemy. I can say I don't believe in God, but still I can appreciate a temple. I can go to a temple. I can sing the highest amount of bhajans, or I can sing songs of devotion. Still, I may not believe in God. So it doesn't kind of it gives you that kind of flexibility, traditions, which religions don't have. Religions are a different configuration actually. So, and that's why the things like conversion. I mean, if you understand this,
Yeah.
that there are traditions in India and not religions. For a religion, conversion is a very important dynamic. You know,
Yeah.
one of the important dynamics of being a religion is you have to convert, proselytization and conversion. In a
Yeah.
traditional culture, conversion is almost is a disruption of the social fabric. It's illegal.
Yes.
It's unethical. So basically, there's a clash of fundamental philosophies when traditions and cultures meet. And the problem comes with because religions are viewing other pagan, what you call the so-called pagan cultures, as religions, and even the Hindu intellectuals or Sanatana intellectuals are trying to kind of construct themselves as religions. And when actually the Balu's thesis says when you're actually trying to convert traditions into religions, you are actually generating more fundamentalism. You're generating more intolerance. So traditions per se, the fundamental philosophy of traditional land is an indifference to differences. So here is Indian culture, Hinduism or Buddhism or Sikhism or Jainism or tribal culture, everything grew without any fear of violence. Nobody was exterminated in the name
Yeah.
of, it's an indifference. So that's a very important word which he uses, which is indifference. It's not mutual respect, it's not tolerance, it's not synchrony. It's basically you're indifferent to our differences. So when you're indifferent to differences, the whole idea of trying to convert somebody to my faith, there is one true God, and there are multiple false gods. Such things don't exist in a traditional culture. So the problem with India is actually how India dealt with alien religions which came from abroad was they traditionalized them because they
Yeah.
lost their focus on proselytization at the general level. At the
Yeah.
general level, they lost their focus on proselytization, and they started kind of stop distinguishing between the true and the false. So that's how they were kind of getting integrated into Indian society. But this is something which the Christian evangelists or the Islamic clerics resist. They do not want this to happen. So this is something which was the Indian way of traditionalizing religions and achieving harmony. But instead of doing that, we are converting. Instead of continuing that process, we kind of are converting our traditions, flexible traditions, into very rigid religions. We are calling them
Right.
Hindu religion. So because of that, we are having these problems of intolerance and the
Right.
entire idea of Hindutva or Hindutva fundamentalism. So all these things have kind of things come into existence. So
Right.
basically, this is the way we are not understanding India properly. Yeah.
Sir, I don't think it's fair to suddenly ask you a history question, but if you know anything on this, I would like you to expand on it a little. That Ashoka did a genocide of or a massacre of Ajivika saints, and that's the, I guess, one sect inside Hinduism which evaporated overnight just because of, Ashoka did a massacre of them. About 12,000 Ajivika saints were killed off in a matter of 2-3 days. Uh, would you say then he was the one sort of Abrahamized king, or basically a socialist dictator, who was not indifferent to difference, or do you think there were more like him and we only know about Ashoka?
Uh, I'm not a historian, so I cannot really comment on all these aspects. But thing is,
Yeah.
like the intolerances and the wars we had for on the basis of religion were exceptions in Indian culture,
Hmm.
and they were the rule in Western culture, where they were religious war, the kind of religious wars
Yeah.
which were fought in medieval Europe and the Arab land, or they never existed in Indian culture. So we kind of had wars, we had this thing, but they were exceptions. So exceptions actually prove the rule. So
Yeah.
that's how I would look at it. So there may have
Right.
been instances, so Shaivites fighting Vaishnavites or things like that. But the kind of physical violence which your kind of the religious wars of Europe or other Islamic Christian wars happened, the Inquisitions and those things never happened in Indian culture. No.
Right. Now, sir, I think the very interesting aspect that you have brought out about from SN Balagangadhara's work is the question of rigidity. Now, if we are not rigid about anything at all, then we get run over by people who are united and rigid. Or if we are too rigid, then again we create a stupid society who just follows every rule. Everyone in the society follows the prime minister and does every crime that the prime minister or the political system expects them to commit. So how do we strike a balance here, or do you think there must be a balance, or should we get rid of all rigidity?
I think you have to understand what Balu is trying to say. I mean, it's a difficult question to answer, but I think we have to understand what traditions are, what Indian culture is all about. We have a very flexible rigidity, I would say. Like, we
Yeah,
change our
pretty
shape,
much.
but we are very
Yeah.
flexible to what influences. We kind of change ourselves, we adapt very easily to that's a kind of Indian culture, because we adapt very easily to kind of other influences, but still we remain
Hmm.
very Indian wherever we go.
Right.
So that's the strength of our Indian culture, and I think that's what we should be looking at, because
Right.
trying to Abrahamize our religions, our traditions, is something which is on a dangerous path, because that's going to really increase the tensions, the communal tensions in the days to come, because they are polarizing more by kind of the present understanding everywhere. Yeah.
Now, does he give some prescriptions and suggestions about the way forward, what we can do differently, whether it's in policy level or education system changes in those
Yeah.
such
So
things?
here he comes with this, like, I mean, let's talk about Varna and Jati also, because I think that forms a very important component of
Yes.
Balu's thesis.
Yeah.
Now, caste and subcaste was something which grew in Western context, and Varna and Jati is something which grew in Indian context. So, like, basically, the understanding of caste and subcaste was again superimposed on Varna and Jati by the colonials. And today we have a complete mess of the condition, because we have only four Varnas and 4,000 Jatis. And how
Yeah.
these Jatis correlate to Varnas, nobody knows. And then, so today our caste story is a mixture of three strands. One is the original Varna Jati arrangement, which nobody knows, the rules of which were never theorized by our Indian scriptures.
Okay.
Number two was a colonial understanding of this caste system, where they kind of created this rigid hierarchy, where one is always exploiting the other. There's always a discrimination, there's always some kind of exploitation going on. That was their understanding of the caste system. Something like a class system, which was very prevalent in the word itself. Caste came from the Portuguese word casta, which was actually superimposed when the Portuguese landed on the Goan shores. They kind of had casta, a very important idea in their world, in the Portuguese world,
Yeah.
where a lot of Muslims and Jews were converted to Christians, and they became the new Christians, the caste of the new Christians, and they were the caste of the old Christians. So these castas were actually having a lot of problems with each other, where the new Christians had a lot of difficulties getting jobs and getting other things. So that kasta concept was something which was superimposed on our jatis and varnas. So, and post independence, instead of correcting what the correct understanding of Varna and Jati might be, our governments went on creating more and more categories like forward caste or backward caste, A, B,
Hmm.
C, D, E, all these kinds of categories. So, all
Hmm.
these strands have come together into a huge big mess, And today we don't know anything about the caste system, and the entire
Hmm.
world internationally
Yeah.
identifies India only by its caste system. Now
Yeah.
that's something so tragic because
Hmm.
we are something much more beyond all this, and yet the whole narrative builds up that there's only discrimination and exploitation going on in Indian society, which is so
Hmm.
wrong.
Yeah.
So
Sir,
we have to, the
yeah,
reason
yeah, go
for
on.
this, the reason for this actually says is there's
Hmm.
a very important concept it develops called colonial consciousness,
Hmm.
which is a permanent alteration of the intellectual frameworks much after the colonials have left. So even
Yeah.
after the colonials have left, we still term kind to think what they have put in our minds. So whatever
Yeah.
their stories have been they've told, especially the Aryan
Yeah.
Dravidian stories, they discuss this Aryan
Hmm.
Dravidian story. So we have
Yeah.
accepted that without questioning
Yeah.
that it could be wrong. Yeah. And
Hmm.
then we are talking in English. We English became the language of social mobility, is the language
Hmm.
of the elite. That
Yeah.
was a colonial consciousness. We
Yeah.
read Western books. We wrote. I mean, it goes
Hmm.
beyond Western fashion and Western technology, but
Yeah. Yeah.
everything we understand about India is colored by Western lenses. So that is he
Yeah.
calls colonial consciousness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is what Jesai Deepak calls coloniality.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
where they just use a different term. So, sir, according to you or according to S. N. Balagangadhara, how is caste different in Europe maybe or in the Western world and different here? What is the difference that S. N. Balagangadhara was talking about?
Not difference. We are not really talking about difference, but
Hmm.
we should understand what is Varna and what is Jati.
Yeah.
Jati is the actual lived social reality of India, where there are multiple jatis with multiple
Hmm.
practices, lots of gods, lots of rituals, books, philosophies, ideas. Everything is like there are 4,000 jatis,
Yeah.
at the present count, and
Yeah.
each have their own kind of way of living,
Hmm.
their gods, their rituals, their practices.
Hmm.
So, what are these jatis? How have they evolved? Jatis, when Manu kind of described, there were only 50 jatis. Now they have grown into 4,000. So, how have these jatis come into picture? What is the revolution? How do they merge? How do they split?
Hmm.
These are the things which are never kind of studied by our social sciences, and that's a problem. And Varna is something which is more deeper. It's at a meta narrative level because it's a greater idea. It's an idea. It's a quartet. Like Sri Aurobindo talks about the three quartets of Indian civilization, which were the foundation of Indian civilization. The first quartet was the Varna, the four Varnas, the
Hmm.
Brahmins, the Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and the Shudras. That was the first quartet. The second quartet was the ashramas, the four ashramas. You have the
Right.
Brahmacharya, the
Hmm.
Gruhastha ashrama, the Sannyas, and the Vanaprastha ashrama, or
Hmm.
the Vanaprastha and the Sannyasa, and then the four Purusharthas, the Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. So he says like all these three quadrants are deeply interlinked with each other. And
Yeah.
because of this interlinking, that is one of the greatest strengths of Indian culture. And this is what exactly even Anand Kumar Swami told about. That you cannot study Varna in isolation
Hmm.
from your the Purusharthas, from the concepts of Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha, and from the concept of your ashramas. And Varna
Hmm.
is again linked to your karma. It is linked to your reincarnation, to your rebirth.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
these ideas are metaphysical ideas which come at a very high level, where Varna is something totally different from the Jati. So when a one-to-one correlation with Jati and Varna has
Hmm.
been a near impossible task from the
Hmm.
time of colonials. But still we
Yeah.
are insisting on doing some kind
Yeah.
of correlation.
Yeah.
So this is where we are actually going wrong. So we should, I think, study the phenomena of Jati and we have to involve the traditional scholars, because that's one thing which the academia, which was dominated by one particular ideology after independence, they never bothered to kind of involve the traditional scholars into the understanding of these meta concepts like Varna or Purusharthas. What is Indian culture all about? And when you do that, you are breaking the fabric of the country by imposing your colonial ideas even after so many decades after independence.
Yeah.
Yeah, so one of the major projects which Balu talks about is we have to decolonize the social sciences, because that's where the decolonization begins. Because once the social sciences actually decolonize themselves, it trickles on to other areas. The politicians, the media,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
bureaucracy, everything kind
Yeah.
of changes, and you
Yes.
understand that the country changes.
Yes. Sir, is it is it feasible to involve traditional experts in the academia? Because will there be an unified answer from anyone from any tradition? Everyone will
There will
answer
be.
all the questions you mentioned differently, depending on what kind of a Brahmin he is, from which region, and which what kind of what
No,
Varna,
no.
even what Jati inside Brahmin, Varna, etc.
Yeah.
This
I
Brahmin,
mean,
that Brahmin, that kind of Brahmin, plus which
there,
Sampradaya.
there's a lot of traditional scholars who
Yeah.
actually, one problem happens is they are kind of unaware of what this discussions taking part in the Western world. So what Indology is doing, what the social sciences are doing in the English language,
Right.
many of the traditional scholars are simply not even aware of what's going on. So
Yeah.
either they remain completely cocoon, or
Hmm.
the second important thing is many of them are simply indifferent to what's happening. And because they don't have
Yeah.
the adequate tools to kind of counter those kind of narratives. But if you look at a lot of Indian philosophical discussions in Nyaya or Vaisheshika or Advaita or Dvaita, there's so much of philosophy, there's so much of knowledge which is being generated. India was a knowledge producing culture, and the amount
Yeah.
of contributions India had towards knowledge was
Yeah.
enormous, absolutely
Hmm.
enormous. We had our own kind of philosophies, we had our own
Yes.
darshanas,
Yeah.
and our traditions spoke about everything:
Hmm.
science, metallurgy, chemistry, medicine,
Yeah.
physics,
Yeah.
mathematics, algebra, astronomy. Everything was discussed freely and openly.
Yeah.
And also,
There's even an ancient Sanskrit manual on stealing. Even it's called Chaurya Shastra or something.
steel, metallurgy, roads, town
Yeah.
planning, sanitation.
Yeah.
You name the domain, we had output,
Yeah.
knowledge output, because we were studying and we generated knowledge on our own without actually getting influence from anywhere outside. So there's a
Hmm.
lot of tradition, there's a lot of things which are written. But thing is, what happened again? An important thing happened is we broke with our important language of Sanskrit, and we took up English as our national language after independence.
Hmm.
So we study in English, we read in English, and then we say we should not be getting influence with English is something which is not going to happen. So it's going to take a lot of effort, probably
Yeah.
50 years, 100 years. It's not a
Yeah.
small time project.
Yeah.
But I think this decolonization is not a 1 year or a 5 year or a 10-year project. It's a long, long
Hmm.
project. Yeah.
Yeah. So, sir, does Balu suggest that traditional people must be hired in social science academia? Otherwise,
Uh,
how do we decolonize social sciences?
I mean, there has to be some kind of a forums, interactions, people, I mean, at all levels,
Hmm.
communicators, activists, politicians, leaders, bureaucrats, how
Hmm.
we should kind of understand our, and the thing starts with academia. And I think
Yeah.
academia is the place where our decolonization, our theories of India, our theories of Indian culture
Yeah.
should start changing, and we
Yeah.
should
Yeah.
understand what are the Indian phenomena like Hinduism and Buddhism, and all these encounters between Buddhism and Hinduism were simply figments of imagination.
Yeah.
What is this Varna and Jati? Does secularism really help in India? Because
Hmm.
secularism is something which was actually a solution for a Christian Europe at a very
Yeah.
specific point of its history, when all the denominations were fighting each other, and they had the solution of secularism where the church kind of separated from the state. This
Hmm.
was not a universal solution for all cultures across all times. So today, when you see the influx of Islam into Europe, there's a lot of issues. They are not able to handle the problem. In India, when you apply secularism, because they thought secularism was a solution for Europe, it must be a solution for India too. And it tries to employ secularism for India. And today, the friction and the polarization between Hindus and Muslims has gone even further, despite secularism being the consistent political philosophy across decades. Why this is happening? Because secularism is fantastically failing in our country. Because the solution is wrong, and we kind of believed that it was the right solution. Because it came from the West, it has to be the right solution. So that is what our colonial consciousness is all about.
Yeah.
We didn't think about that we had our own solutions to create harmony. Why? How come how Bengalis and everybody could live in one united way? How the Marathas, every single language was represented without fighting each other? These were all things which we never questioned.
Yeah. So, sir, how does the decolonization of academia happen? Who are going to be the social science professors? Are there going to be just syllabus changes, and then the same people are going to teach? Or if traditionalists are involved, then again, which Brahmin from which area is going to teach the real correct thing? If at all there is a quote unquote real correct thing to teach about traditions.
I don't know. This is a project for the future. The academia. People in the academia should start kind of setting up maybe departments and to kind of challenge the present narratives, the present theories, and then kind of bring up with alternatives, and that kind of seeps into then public consciousness. So now today's Balu's ideas are very different. Nobody kind of one doesn't understand them. Two, they kind of, even if they understand it, it kind of takes away all their foundational ideas. So that kind of, there's a lot of resistance to his ideas. But thing is, unless you kind of follow Balu today, I don't see any hope with the present kind of colonized narratives which going on in India.
Yeah. So, sir, if let's say in a future where we are trying to actively today, let's say if hypothetically today if I was the prime minister and I was trying to decolonize social sciences, and I hire more people who have some knowledge of Indian traditions, but already that there are plenty of Marxists who are Indians only who are teaching this. So how are we going to take the test of someone who is not a Marxist and knows Indian traditions and is an Indian? Is that the way to pursue this? How do we
I really
decolonize
don't
this?
know. I think the decolonization is not it's a long project, years together. I think it starts from at all levels. It's a 360-degree thing, as my friend tells. It starts from, everybody has to be involved. A little bit of media, a little bit of public, a little bit of academia, a little bit of political leadership, the political understanding. Unfortunately, the political understanding of Hinduism, Hindutva, these are also so not very consistent and contradictory. So that also kind of doesn't help. So we need some beginning, and then we latch on. So Balu's work is a good foundation, for people to kind of start working on, because his work opens up 1,000 paths to go forward. To understand Indian culture better.
Now his understanding of caste that you explained to us a while back, how is that different from what the let's say Western academics understood about caste?
See, the
what did they think?
Western thing about caste is something about class. It's a class system where you have a higher class, a lower class, and then you had problems of higher class treating the lower class. So the whole thing about Varna became a class system where the Brahmins are exploiting the Kshatriyas, and Brahmins, they come together to exploit. Brahmins, Kshatriyas, and Vaishyas come together to exploit the Shudras. All these kinds of weird theories, they come into picture. But at a fundamental level, when you look at the Indian scriptures, when you study them, there was never a theorization of Varna. They were more like categories. They were more like categories where they were equals, and they had the different duties. It was a society which was based more on duties rather than rights. So something which is a society which is based on duties is converted into a society based on rights. then this become all this kind of messy narratives which come into play. So if you look at these as four different categories, and if you look at the scriptures, there were many times people who reached the ultimate ideal of the civilization was moksha, of the individual was moksha, and moksha was not denied to any varna. All varnas had equal chance to get into the moksha, because if you
Yeah.
have everyone was following their varna dharma, varna and ashrama, their place, their varna and their ashrama dharma. If everybody is following the four purusharthas in the framework of the four purusharthas, dharma, artha, and kama, material desires was never objected to. So the achievement of moksha was had nothing to do with what varna you belong to. That was a fundamental message of all the scriptures. Everybody from all categories were achieving moksha. Everybody was a guru to everybody. So these kind of things are always brushed under the carpet, and what they see, what is done, the Indologists they have done over all these years is they have cherry picked, different things, different aspects of the literature, and they construct this narrative that there was this whole system of exploitation, discrimination, pushing somebody into the background, not allowing. It was nothing like what they had in the West, like your witch hunters or the inquisitions, the kind of violence which the West saw, the slavery, we never had in Indian culture. We had problems, but it was nothing like the kind which was in the West. The thing is, the superimposition of Western problems into Indian social systems is something which is actually hurting us in understanding ourselves. We are looking at West towards all our validation. We were great astronomically. No. If somebody Westerner says it, only then we accept it. We don't
Yeah.
go to our own books. Darshanas, our philosophies, our darshanas had the most exquisite philosophy, all wound up. We have a better understanding of the world around us. Then Western philosophy is still struggling with ontology, with epistemology. Our ontology of epistemology is all wound up. Everything is there in place. Nyaya, Vaisheshika, they're fantastically everything there. But nobody even knows that there are 6 darshanas in Indian culture, which are so ancient and so complete and so full. People they'll talk about Bertrand Russell, they'll talk about Will Durant, they'll talk about some other Schopenhauer or Nietzsche, but
Yeah.
they'll not talk about Adi Shankara, they'll not talk about the Nyaya, about Gautama, about why this is happening, because this is something which he says is colonial consciousness. We refuse to believe that we were rich and culturally, spiritually, materially, and this is something which we should rediscover in the days to come. Yeah.
Right.
And when we're stuck with colonial narratives, we have these problems. Yeah.
Yeah. Sir, then are you saying that the people with Indians with the Western lenses, or the Westerners who are researching caste, they did not take into account all these ideas of moksha and the ashramas,
No,
etc.? Do you think they did
never,
not
never.
understand that,
No.
or never acknowledge them?
They didn't acknowledge, they didn't understand, they didn't involve the traditional scholars. They have no clue about all those, because what they were working with were the colonial narratives and the Marxist theories after independence. Unfortunately, after independence, Marxist ideology gained foothold in most of our universities, and they set our textbooks, our chapters, and they have been able to give a certain view about India, which is absolutely tragic.
Right. Now, sir, again, every time you mention this involving traditional scholars, that's where I feel a little confused. What does this mean? Because if we have to involve traditional scholars, it has to be predicated on his particular sampradaya, a particular kind of Brahmin, from a particular caste or from a particular place. Then are we going to involve 50 kinds of Brahmins from all over the country, or 50 kinds of Jats or Kshatriyas, who everyone will have a different opinion on Hinduism?
I
And that's how
can't.
we involve traditional scholars.
The connection was lost. I couldn't get the question.
Yeah. I'll repeat myself. So, sir, I was saying that this idea of involving traditional scholars, that's where I feel a little lost, because if let's say today I want to do a project and I want to involve these quote unquote traditional scholars, what scholar from
Sorry, the
which
voice is
caste from? Okay, wait. Hello. Hello. Hello.
Yeah. It's
Okay.
breaking up.
Okay. Wait, then I'll take some shorter questions. Long questions will get broken up in your audio, I think. Okay, someone is asking, an audience member is asking, how do we explain untouchability?
Sorry.
How do we explain untouchability? What's Balagangadhara's understanding of it?
Yeah, I think that's a very important question. And can you listen? Can you?
Yeah.
So Jacob de Rouve discusses untouchability in one of the chapters, and how did this entire idea of untouchability come into Indian society? And the whole idea of dividing Indian population into the depressed classes and the other classes was a colonial project in the early part of the 20th century. And so basically, the whole idea of untouchability is very vague, and nobody knew what actually untouchability meant.
Okay.
And going off. Well, can you hear?
Yeah, the last sentence got broken up. I heard everything
Hello?
up until that.
Yeah, so basically, their censuses kind of tried to define what was untouchability, but they created certain criteria for untouchability which were neither uniform across the country, and there were many to the when it came to the field practices. So even after independence, there were a lot of parliament debates on trying to define what is untouchability. So everything, every practice across the country became untouchability. Some at one place it was like if you are not touching the water, it became untouchability. Sometimes if someone and you clean the house after he goes off, it becomes untouchability. So it went on kind of adding up practices which were never uniform across the country. So today we have created this whole group of untouchables or Dalits based on the single criteria of X untouchability. So the single criteria for defining a country today is untouchability. Next state.
Hmm.
And Jacob de Rouve actually discusses this in great detail, because today 165 million people and 1200 jatis have been clubbed together with varied practices. Each one have their own rules, own kind of rituals into one single group of Dalits. They are not untouchability going on in the so-called forward caste, so-called other groups, and in the groups which are themselves called the untouchables. World narrative about India is actually on very shaky grounds, and
Hmm.
this is what the Ghent school talks about. So this is a very deep aspect of US. So how whole idea of untouchability, because every single theory of caste, every single theory of caste has been falsified in the Jati practices. They say endogamy, some they don't have endogamy. They talk about purity. Purity doesn't stand in some jatis.
Hello. Wait, his internet connection went away. Wait. Hope he rejoins. Well, wait, I'll just text him. He'll probably turn on his Wi-Fi, then come in. Wait, texting him. Those of you all who are watching this and have been our long-time viewers, of course, know that I don't agree with this school of thought on caste, but I'm just listening to his opinions. Sir is back.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. It's working now. Are you back from Wi-Fi now?
Yeah, I'm back. Yeah, tell me.
Okay, sir. According to you, what is untouchability, and does it exist, or has it ever existed?
See, there were a lot of practices which exist in all communities, in all so-called every group, every community has these practices which have been defined as untouchability, and they are never uniform in this country. But the whole idea is like you have created this entire category, and then you are kind of making it almost as a permanent problem in India when it is not. When we should be looking forward, and what we look at is the jatis are different, and there are different categories. When you look at them as categories and not as hierarchies, I think that's a solution to the problem. You cannot think only in terms of, because there are a lot of there are a lot of practices in certain parts of the country where the Brahmins are considered to be untouchables. Whether if
Yeah.
the Brahmin comes to the house,
Yeah.
the community actually washes the house, and they
Yeah.
don't touch the glass or whatever are touched by the Brahmins. So
Hmm.
the practices are really so different. The jati practices is what we have to look at, and the understanding of India should be coming from the idea that all these jatis are categories of the same kind. You don't create hierarchies, and when you're creating these rigid hierarchies, you are running into problems. Varna
Should
is
the
something.
Yeah, go on.
Varna is something which is completely different from Jati, and how Varna correlates to Jati is something which is a study for the future. And when we look at all the Varnas as four different categories without any hierarchy, and all the Jatis as categories without hierarchies, all are equal. I think that is the, because when you interact with people around you, you have friends, you have from all the communities. I don't think an average Indian really kind of really worries about who his friends, what his, and everybody is quite open about his whatever jati if he wants to, and that doesn't make him anything less or more when you're making a friendship or when you're kind of interacting with people. That is a lived Indian experience. That is the experience I had. So this is what is the problem of the strife, that we are trying to create hierarchies, and we should understand what was the idea of Varna, what was the ashrama, what were the purusharthas, where does moksha come into here, what are the concepts of rebirth, what is karma, incarnations, right? What are the lived jati practices? These are the things we should be studying. These are, I know these are very
Right.
difficult to kind of digest or kind of accept immediately, because
Yeah.
everybody has his own experience of
Hmm.
how they have dealt. They might have seen some practices and so, oh, no, no, this is the
Hmm.
thing which is happening. But I
Hmm.
think at a larger level, we have to re-understand, reconceptualize,
Hmm.
as Balu calls, all the
Hmm.
India studies. Yeah. So
Right. Uh,
Reconceptualizing India Studies is a very important book of Balu, by the way. So I think
okay.
it's recommended read. Yeah.
Okay. I have a question on caste. There's a related question from the audience as well. What exactly is Varna? What is the Varna? What is the correct way of looking at Varna?
Varna, what is Varna?
Hmm.
Categories, the categories, and for perhaps it's how a system or a society should be organized. Because even when you talk about what is the four varnas, the Brahmins, the Kshatriyas, and your Vaishyas and the Shudras,
Hmm.
how a society should be organized. These were kind of, they were names given to certain categories, and and I think the focus of Indian scriptures were on their duties rather than rights. So I think we need another understanding of Varna, how they should be studied. Yeah, the
Right.
present understanding is absolutely messy because it is creating strife in society. It's not causing harmony, which is what we are looking at. Yeah.
Right. Sir, should the government recognize castes at all? Should you be able to write your caste in anywhere, in any document in India?
See, again, I think these are political things, and to have a new understanding is a very long process. It's going to take a lot of time, decades, before one can really understand how we should really be changing our society, how we are molding our society, what is the role of reservations, what is the role of based on caste, based on jatis, how we should look at affirmative action, does it really help, how it is actually affecting our society, who should be helped, why is caste important in the certificates, your this thing. These are very long-term issues, and I think this small talk, I don't think we can really cover them. But this is a very long project. Basically, people who really are talking about this project, they are talking about in decades, and probably even a century. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Should we have reservations?
That's a tricky question. Let's skip over that. I really don't want to
Okay.
get into that. Affirmative action, I
Okay.
think, yeah.
Okay. Do you think there is any use for the government recognizing caste other than reservation? Is there any point to it? Let's say if reservation goes away today, should there still be recognition of caste in documents?
I mean, the only reason why the government looks at the caste is giving some benefits of some kind.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
beyond that, where does the government has a role? I mean, that's what, because one of the arguments which in the parliamentary debates was the idea of Dalits and untouchables exists only for the parliamentary and the legal systems, and the constitution and legal systems, but they are not a social reality. That's what many of the parliamentarians debated about, because the reality is only constitutionally and legally, rather than we are kind of trying to divide people on some very artificial divisions. Yeah, practices, problems occur in all societies. There are problems in all societies. The discrimination exists in Western cultures, in Russian cultures, and in Polynesian cultures, and Pacific cultures, and everywhere exploitation, discrimination, everything happens. But to read only caste system as the reason for all these problems and nowhere else is something which is an intellectual fraud, as Balu says. It's like kind of treachery. You're looking only at the caste system as a source of all problems in India, but you don't look at, you don't even consider caste as a reason for other same problems existing elsewhere. So we kind of have internalized this narrative. There's a caste system which is evil, which is bad, and at the same time, every single form which we enter in our life, we have to mention our caste. Yeah. So that's how the irony of the situation.
Yeah. Sir, would you say that these discriminatory practices, whether in high degrees or low degrees, they happen everywhere, including India, or they happen only in India, or everywhere except India?
Would you be so naive to believe that it will happen only in India? No other world, no other culture in the world has discrimination. No, I mean these practices. What about slavery? What about slavery trade was such a massive. What about colonialism? What about the practices which happened in the Inquisitions? What are the practices which are happening even today in capitalistic? What are the practices happening in feudalistic Europe? In Russia, in communist Russia, in communist China, in capitalist societies, discrimination, exploitation occurs everywhere. It's a human tendency.
Did
It's
that
a
happen in
human
India
tendency.
as well, or did it all happen after
It
the British
happened.
came?
It happens all over the world, universally across all times. But to read only one, to give only one explanation as the explanation, for everything happening in India and nowhere else is not something which is good,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sir, you have written reviews of Dr. Shomode's book as well. How did
Yeah.
you come upon his work?
Oh, I was introduced to him through Nitin Sridhar,
Acha.
and I found him very interesting. So he's a
Yeah.
very unusual person in the sense that he's a brilliant historian. He writes some beautiful books. So I was very impressed with
Yeah.
his view about India as well, about different things, really.
Okay. Yeah, go on, sir.
The
Wait.
things which Balu
I
talks about, colonial consciousness. Yeah.
We have a question from the audience again. That what were some? Can you give some examples of where the so-called lower caste was the dominant or powerful jati?
See, if you really want examples, who are the most powerful jatis in communities in Andhra Pradesh or in Telugu-speaking states of Telangana and Andhra? It's the Reddis, it's the Kammas, it's the Kapus, who are very powerful in Gujarat. They are Patels. If you go with strict definition, the Reddis or the Kammas or the Kapus, they're the most powerful economically, socially, and politically. And if you look by the Varna category, by definition, they are not Brahmins, they are not Kshatriyas, they are not in the true sense, or the Vaishyas, they are the Shudras. So you look at the most powerful communities anywhere across the country, politically, socially, and economically, they have been the Shudra Varna, not the Brahmins, not the Kshatriyas, not the Vaishyas. So when you say lower, this the entire thing about higher and lower is again you're superimposing something which is very Western into Indian. That's what Balu is talking about. Why do you talk about this higher and lower? Today, if you give proper equal opportunities, everybody has a chance to come to the top, right? So,
Yeah.
I mean, the whole idea about higher and lower is something which is again you're thinking about in terms of rights, exploitation, discrimination. No, I mean, we look at them as categories. Perhaps that's the answer to how we should be
Right.
looking forward.
Yeah.
And categories don't have hierarchies.
Yeah.
It's like different colors: red, green, yellow,
Right.
blue. And nobody is higher, nobody is lower.
Right. Okay, sir. That's the end of our discussion pretty much. Not too many
Lovely.
important questions as well. So thank you, sir. I look forward
Thank
to
you so
having you
much.
back on our podcast.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you
sir.
so
Thank
much
you
for
for
having
joining our
me
live
here.
stream.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Yes. Thank you, sir. Good night.
যদি সবাই ফিরে যায় ওরে ওরে ও ভাগা সবাই ফিরে যায় যদি গহন পথে যাওয়ার কালে কেউ ফিরে না চায় তবে পথের কাটা তুই রক্ত মাখা চরণ তলে একলা দলরে তুই রক্ত মাখা চরণ তলে একলা দলরে যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে তবে একলা চলো রে যদি আলো না ধরে ওরে ওরে ও ভাগা আলো না ধরে যদি ঝড় বাদলে আধার রাতে দুয়ার দেয় ঘরে তবে বজ্রানলে আপন বুকের পাঁজর জ্বালিয়ে নিয়ে একলা জলরে আপন বুকের পাঁজর জ্বালিয়ে নিয়ে একলা জলরে যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে তবে একলা চলো রে একলা চলো একলা চলো একলা চলো একলা চলো